Hi, welcome to Chicago's Public Library, You Media Speak On It, a series of conversations connecting teens and creatives. My name is Julia. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm going to be a senior at DePaul College Prep next year.
And so today we are speaking with Anki Deo of Our Streets Now. Anki is a campaigner on the streets team for Our Street Now that focuses on getting voices heard about sexual harassment and prioritizing making changes to our current laws. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat and we will ensure your questions are answered. And now I'm going to hand it off to Julia to start us off.
All right, so our first question is, when stopping in a cafe to get work done, what is your go-to drink?
Wow, I haven't worked in a cafe in ages. So I used to get a flat white, which is pretty standard. But I've actually just read quite a scary article about the dangers of caffeine addiction and especially drinking caffeine in the afternoon. So now I'm thinking next time I go, it'll probably be a mint tea or something like that.
That sounds amazing.
Standard.
Cozy. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? When were you born? Where did you go grow up, and where did you go to college?
Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of southwest London, which was really lovely. It was quite boring and kind of leafy, but I loved it. And then I went to university at Cambridge, which was quite a strange experience. It's very fast paced, quite pushy, and I guess you feel so unique while you're having it. But yeah, it was quite interesting. And I graduated during the pandemic. So yeah, it's been great ever since then. I've been working in a school as a teacher. So that's what I've just got home from now.
Oh, wow. Graduating during the pandemic isn't that great, but you made it, and that's great that you're now a teacher. Is there a specific subject that you teach in school, or?
Yeah, so I teach French and Spanish up to GCSE, which is like age 16. And right now I'm also teaching two subjects called PSHE and Health and Social Care, which are kind of all about citizenship, economics in like civics, those kinds of things. So yeah, a bit of a mixture, but that's kind of how things are in school at the moment. Everyone's just helping out in whatever way they can.
What's like the age group you teach?
So the ages are 11 to 16. I think the school system is slightly different, but it would be the end of middle school and most of high school, I think that covers. But 16 is when most kids in the UK finish their big exams, which are GCSEs, and then they go on to do other subjects.
Yeah, I know the school system, at least here in Chicago, is like high school is 14 to 18, and then like grade school is like any age younger than 14. But for the next question, can you talk about your involvement with Our Streets Now as a campaigner?
Sure. So I work in the education team, which is called Our Schools Now. It's kind of a sub-campaign of the overall group. And I would say the focus of this campaign is kind of twofold. First of all, we work with young people who are interested in activism. So, for example, we lead workshops or offer advice through email or through social media for young people who want to tackle public sexual harassment in their own schools and their communities. But then secondly, we also target schools themselves to kind of get them to change their attitudes and their policies towards sexual harassment. So I personally have been making lesson plans, which have been taught in different schools. And then we've been making kind of different resources to help schools come together and actually tackle it. Because obviously teachers nowadays are very busy, especially with the pandemic. The exams thing kind of went a bit askew. So it's kind of our job, we feel, to make it as easy as possible, as simple as possible for schools to just get on with it and start identifying, dealing with, and eventually preventing public sexual harassment from even happening in the first place.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. Just because I know, like, growing up, I didn't really like hear much about that until like I hit high school and just educated myself, and it's still currently an issue here in Chicago as well. But I wanted to ask, can you talk a little bit more about your involvement with Our Streets Now as a campaigner? Like what actions do you take on your day-to-day life?
Yeah, so the biggest thing I've done, like I said, was developing the lesson resources and what's called a scheme of work, which is kind of linking the existing curriculum, which was kind of the government's layout of what all children should be learning as part of their social education, and kind of linking that to public sexual harassment specifically, because the curriculum does talk about forms of sexual harassment and forms of harmful behavior, but schools often overlook public sexual harassment, even though it's something that's really frequently experienced. I mean, for example, 35% of schoolgirls in the UK have been sexually harassed wearing their school uniform. So, they're visibly underage and still being harassed. I think we kind of realised that schools are the really obvious way to tackle this, because young people deserve to be informed about what will most likely, sadly, happen in their lives. But also tackling the change at a really young age should hopefully change the culture, so that young men and, anyone really who could grow up to be a perpetrator of this change their minds about it. But I'm also currently organising a programme to work with young people over the summer called Summer Change Makers, which is for 14 to 18-year-old students, and will basically be talking about how to create a manifesto for change, and then how to create a campaign that works on one of those. It's all a bit vague at the moment because we really want to let people work out what they want to do. But yeah, we do workshops like that. And then the other big thing that I would do is working on the anti-racist working group. So within the campaign, everyone's really committed to it being inclusive. But I quite like the challenge of thinking, it's easy to rest on your laurels and think, we're just doing great work, but how can we actually make it better? How can we make our stance on anti-racist organising really clear, and that's at the heart of what we do? So, for example, on the schools campaign, we're looking at how our rhetoric and how our policy recommendations don't inadvertently criminalise young men of colour. So as much as we need to, not tolerate this behaviour, how can we put that across in a way that doesn't mean that young men of colour get disproportionately targeted by disciplinary procedures? I find that, we've not finished really thinking that one all the way through, but that's the kind of question that I think the anti-racist stance really comes in there.
Yeah, and do you use these to teach in your own lesson plans for your own students?
Yeah, so I actually did have the opportunity to teach my own students, and it was really nice because it was my form class as well. So it's kids I knew really well. And I think especially because public sexual harassment is quite a sadly pervasive experience, it's one in which the kids can really let loose and talk about their own personal experience. It's not too intimate, it's not too private that they feel kind of embarrassed to sorry, there's a pigeon smashed against the window. Okay. Yeah, they don't feel too embarrassed to share their experiences. And I think they actually found it quite healing to talk about it together and identify the fact that with public sexual harassment, because of the quite fleeting nature of it and the fact that the perpetrator can be unknown, it can be really difficult to process the emotions in the moment. And I think for them realizing that, it would be okay for them to, in the moment, just be a bit nervous, be a bit scared, not necessarily stand up for themselves in the way they might want to, but there would be actions that they could take afterwards to stand up for themselves and to be more empowered. I think that was actually a really touching moment. And that was something that I incorporated into lesson plans afterwards, having had that teaching experience. So that was quite lucky for me to be able to experiencing it from both sides, as the planner and then as the executor almost.
Wow, that's really powerful that you're providing this safe space for these kids just to open up about sexual harassment and learn about it. I think it is definitely needed today just to make that change and end sexual harassment. At some point, do you do talking circles every week, or what does that look like? Your lesson plans?
So in the lesson plans, there's kind of a mixture of activities to get them to think about different aspects of public sexual harassment. So obviously they'll do the basics of identifying which activities would constitute it, but then also thinking about how it affects different people in a different way. So I think getting young people to think about intersectionality from a really young age is important. So, for example, in my school, we focus quite a lot on Islamophobic harassment because a lot of the students are Muslim, the LGBTQ plus community, disabilities, how all of those things will change the experience. And then we talk about ways forward, because instead of focusing on how to be safe in the present, we really want to focus on the campaign on how to make changes to the future. And obviously we have to acknowledge the current state of events, and I would never tell my students to do whatever they wanted, because that's sadly not the world we live in. But I do believe that they need to know that the world can get to that place. If we always tell young people not to wear headphones, not to go out late at night, not to dress certain ways, we're basically accepting the status quo, and I really don't want to do that. So yeah, I think kind of a mixture of interactive activities and things that get them to think about the work, but also kind of at that point I do have to be a bit more like, I need to lay down the law. We can't keep acting like this. It's a mixture of teaching and kind of workshopping almost.
And what inspired you to like teach your students like that and like get involved with Our Streets Now?
So why I decided to become a teacher and why I decided to get involved with Our Streets Now, basically the same reason. I really think that young people are the key to social change. I think that in some ways, the easiest way to get an attitude change is to start young and make people not even entertain the idea of the opposite, harmful behavior. But in terms of wider reasons why I got involved with the campaign, I was increasingly frustrated with incidents of public sexual harassment in my own life. And I can't take credit because I only joined the campaign after it got quite big, but I saw how well it was doing. And it really seemed like there was an opportunity for people to have their voices heard. And I just believe in the specific focus of the school team. So I already knew Maya Tutton, who was one of the co-founders, and when she said that they were expanding their education team, I like completely jumped on the opportunity. And the rest is history.
That's amazing. Have you ever experienced any sort of harassment that inspired you to do this?
Yes, sadly, and I don't think I'm probably the only one in this talk that's felt this way. It's quite common in the UK, at least, for people to shout from their cars. So I would say that happens frustratingly frequently. But I think the time I felt most motivated by was when I was at university, at college. I was on a run in the morning and a man leant out of his car to kind of shout at me. And I reported it to the police. But when I went to kind of give a police statement, because this had been a repeat offender and we'd actually already been informed that there was someone kind of around the kind of campusy, around those areas doing this, the police were less than helpful. I mean, now I'm not super surprised by that, but I thought that I was helping if they had already started collecting a case, and maybe I was being helpful, but they were unable to find him, and I actually found that whole experience quite difficult. So I think from then on, I really felt that there has to be both a legislative solution. I definitely believe that lawmaking has a huge role in, creating cultural attitude shifts, but also creating real consequences for harassers. But I really believe in the cultural change aspect, which is why I like working on the education team.
Yeah, and I agree with that, especially like we're all women in today's society and it's been so normalized. And I really appreciate how you're a teacher and you're like teaching your students how to do the right thing. And also, like if you had like the opportunity to expand Our Streets Now in any way, like how would you do it? Or are there any actions you take?
I think the main thing is that we're currently running on a volunteer basis. So many people put loads of hours and effort and time into it and kind of get nothing real back. So it would be amazing if we could kind of throw more money at it. I know that sounds very like gauche and capitalist, but to be able to pay people for their labor and even, raise more awareness would be amazing. I think my dream for the schools team would be if we had some kind of like wide recognition in schools across the UK. Often the schools that we reach are the ones with the teachers who already really care, they're already passionate, and they're just waiting for the resources to come and the knowledge to come. But I'm sure the schools that could do with it a bit more, where they have that kind of inbuilt culture that comes from the top down, we might not be reaching them yet. So I think if we could have even more access to those schools, or even more legitimacy within those environments, and we could get those schools to make a change too, that would feel really good. But to be honest, as we're quite a well-oiled machine, and I feel really lucky to work with everyone there. Everyone's super passionate, gives their time so freely, and it's quite inspiring to be around, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think if we just get as many volunteers and get schools on top of this curriculum to make that change towards sexual harassment, we're just like going down the right path. And so I want to ask, where do you hope Our Streets Now will be in 5 years?
So I have a couple of things. On the legislative side of things, in terms of making public sexual harassment illegal, I hope that would be in action. I mean, we've made amazing strides. I can't take any credit for it because I'm not on that side of the campaign, but amazing work has been done on that. And I think, recent events in the UK really led people to believe that this is something that is actually a great idea and would be really important. But in terms of the school side of things, like I said, having a bit more recognition, a bit more status in schools, but also for public sexual harassment to be recognised within the relationships and sex education curriculum in the UK, and for that to be rolled out really consistently everywhere. Because in its current state, it's amazing that we now have compulsory relationships and sex education. That's quite a recent change from last year. But I think the quality of that can vary quite widely from school to school. So I think in 5 years, with some really dedicated campaigning and quite focused outreach to specific schools, that could be achieved. And obviously this could be a bit of a pipe dream, but I think running similar campaigns in other countries would be amazing. Obviously the UK is not the only country with this issue, like you both have alluded to. So obviously that would require a lot of volunteers, but that would be amazing too.
Most definitely. I think it would be really helpful if a similar campaign like Our Streets Now can have a similar impact here in Chicago, just because this issue is just so normalized, like on our streets and even in school and relationships. So I don't know, maybe making that first step towards creating a campaign similar to this would be pretty helpful.
Yeah. And to help change our world and help better our societies. And like you said, that like one of the main focuses like you do on Our Streets Now is education in changing current policies. Have you had an opportunity to work for this specific cause with Our Streets? And if so, can you share your experience?
Yeah, so in terms of changing educational policy, we kind of ended up being a bit of a loggerhead because the UK government did change the policy to make relationships and sex education compulsory in all schools. But like I said, the quality differs, and the fact that public sexual harassment doesn't always get mentioned can be a bit of a problem. And I think there's also the issue with relationships and sex education of whether you're teaching it in a kind of neoliberal way, in which case it's kind of abstain, and we're only teaching it within a certain set of values, which can be very excluding for more marginalized voices. So I'm thinking particularly of the LGBTQ plus community, versus just giving students the information that they need. So we try really hard, and we always run the resources and things that we create past kind of a consulting team of students, parents, and teachers, just to check that we have the right tone, that it matches the experiences of young people, and that it's relevant to them. Because I think the most important thing that we're seeing right now is that young people know what they want. I think they've been patronized for far too long. A lot of the time, people really know what they want to learn about. They just need access to the information, and they need great, passionate teachers to tell them about it. So I think, like, I almost see myself more as a facilitator of that. It's not necessarily for us to decide what people should know, although obviously with relationships and sex education there are clear basics like consent, but it's more for us to kind of allow people to find out what they're curious about. And I think a great example of this is the fact that I was teaching students about coercive control and how to identify it in a relationship, and one of them kind of expressed a feeling that they knew how to identify a lot of things, but they didn't know how to tell anyone about them. And that's a step that we very commonly miss. It's very easy for us to say, well, here are all the problems, and if they happen, just tell someone. But actually, how do you start those conversations? Who do you choose? If you choose someone and they break your confidentiality, what do you do? If you choose someone and they find it funny or ignore you, we don't always necessarily think through all of the different ways that young people experience these things. So I found that experience really valuable, being able to kind of plan, get feedback, refine it again. And, we're always looking to update our resources and add more and kind of think about them in different ways. So yeah, that's like the main thing I really enjoy about that side of things.
Yeah, and is it okay if I ask, how can you just start those conversations with people, their loved ones, maybe about a sexual harassment issue in their relationship, or maybe a sign of it? Just because I feel like in our generation, usually a lot of people are silenced about it, just because it might be an uncomfortable conversation, but it has to open up. So how would you say that, how to start off that conversation with someone?
So the main things I would say is that before starting that conversation, you always have to make sure it's happening in the right way. So choosing a time when that person has your attention, that they won't, either inadvertently or intentionally interrupt you or leave you halfway, leaving you feeling quite exposed. And then I think just really describing everything that happened and how you feel about it as well. I think sometimes people kind of go into police mode, or at least what they've seen in police TV shows, and they want to know all the cold, hard facts. They're really important. But I think especially with something like public sexual harassment, where unfortunately, due to the nature of the incident, you're not necessarily going to get that kind of restorative justice that you would want, because that person's probably left your life. You need to process how you feel about it. And the best way to do that is to try and articulate it, or to try and kind of get across. Obviously, not everyone uses their words, but, get across in some way the fact that you're really struggling. And I mean, hopefully, if you've chosen someone who really cares about you, they can then start to see what your needs would be, whether that's just a bit of reassurance, whether that's doing something that takes your mind off it completely, or actually thinking about it, talking it all the way through, or doing something kind of powerful that will make you feel better after it. For example, signing a petition, getting involved in something else to do with campaigning around it, talking to people. I mean, it's like I was saying in that lesson with my students, I think for a lot of them, just sharing their experience was the catharsis that they needed, because it was something they thought maybe they were going through alone, and just finding out that other people had experienced similar or related incidents made them kind of took a bit of a weight off their shoulders. So yeah, those would be my main recommendations.
Wow, that's really touching that your students get to feel that they're not alone and they're in this together, and sexual harassment does happen, and in a way they can connect to each other, and how they can just end that. And I wanted to ask, are there any specific laws you would like to be in place to help end public sexual harassment?
Yeah, so our legal campaign, which is called #CrimeNotCompliment, is aiming to introduce essentially kind of criminalizing public sexual harassment by making the perpetrators pay a fine or something similar for being perpetrators of it. Obviously, that's not necessarily going to work in every case. So the aim is not necessarily to have all of these people be fined or locked up or anything like that. Obviously, justice doesn't come about just by people interacting with the police and justice system. It's more about the cultural message it sends out, that things which are enshrined in law are either tolerated or not tolerated, and showing through the kind of the law of the nation that we don't tolerate this, and that it is actually a crime and unacceptable behavior is just really powerful. I think it would put it on par with other things. And I think the example that Maya and Gemma always uses is it's illegal to throw away cigarettes and litter, but it's not illegal to shout at people in the street really, really, really kind of humiliating and quite threatening things. That seems like it's completely at an odds with how our society should be. So I think, just a law criminalizing it and kind of explicitly saying that it's not tolerated is really important.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that's super important. And I do think that if like laws are in place and stuff and fines, and like you said, that'll really help. And I know you touched on this earlier through like your experience and stuff and why you went into this, but what motivated you to cultivate change?
I think it's a couple of things. Firstly, the fact that activism works. There's such a long line of activists before us, particularly grassroots activism started by women of colour, and really inclusive campaigns that have achieved real tangible change. I think that makes me feel like it's worthwhile because there's precedent, it does work. And especially when you think kind of through history, things which seemed really subversive and like they were really challenging the status quo have now become completely accepted, and we get that sense of like they were right all along. That definitely makes me realize that societal change is possible. And yeah, like I said, I want to do that through education. But I also love through teaching, seeing how empowered young people are. I mean, they know so much more about societal structures, how it works, particularly I'm thinking around racism, sexism, their inclusiveness regarding sexuality, I just find really inspiring. And I think I'm not that much older than my students, but seeing how big of a gulf there is from when I was at school to them makes me think that, you know, we can be optimistic for the future. This is a generation that really cares about representation, about rights, and about kind of dignity and equalness of dignity as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like our generation just pushes for change and like holds people accountable for their actions. And I just love that about our generation. I can just see like so much passion. I just love it. And what advice do you have for young activists?
So I think the main two things I would say is firstly, join a collective or a campaign. If you care about activism, don't do it alone, because it will, I mean, it's not that you can't, but it will feel so much better for you to know that there are like-minded people around you and people there to support you and kind of be there for you when you're like finding it a bit difficult. I think that's really important. And I really believe in collective change and also the importance of having different voices. No one person can see a problem from every angle. So having other people around you to kind of get you thinking creatively is really important. And the other thing I would say that I've noticed slightly more recently is to avoid the difficulties of social media if you want to, not feeling like you have to participate in social media to be an activist. And that comes from my own personal experience. I'm not really on my personal accounts in a big way. I contact friends, I share things and donate and everything, but in a very private way. And I think in some ways there's this feeling that to be an agent of change, you have to be massive, you have to have a certain number of followers, otherwise your voice doesn't count. And I don't believe that that's true. I think that activism is worthwhile no matter what scale you're doing it on. And although obviously our campaign really does benefit from its big social media reach, not everyone on the campaign spends their time there. It's a great use of time, and I'm really proud of our social media, but it's not my skill set, and I'm happy to use my skills. So I think, not worrying if social media is not your thing. It seems like a weird point to say, but I don't know whether people do feel like they're nothing without 10K followers. And that just seems really upsetting because everyone has something incredible to give to a campaign, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with that. Cause I know like, at least like for me, and I'm sure like plenty of people my age can agree, like it can really like get down on their self-esteem if they look and they don't have as many followers as they want and they feel like they're not worthy. But yeah. And before this interview ends, I just want to thank you because I know that teaching can be a very difficult field. And I feel like what you're doing is making such a big impact on so many different kids. And I really do think that this will help their future. And to leave off on a positive note, like, what are you looking forward to this summer? And like, what are some summer plans? And now that the world is opening back up, are you looking to travel anywhere?
So I'm not sure about traveling yet because the UK is in a bit of a sticky situation, but I've really loved walking through the whole pandemic. I got really into just walking around, and I would love to start going for kind of more specific walks, especially along the coast of the UK, but also just enjoying my city. I absolutely love London. It's amazing that restaurants and galleries are opening up, but I'm also moving house, so that could be quite stressful. And in terms of travel, I would love to be able to go back to India, which is where I'm from, and visit my Aji, my grandmother. She's turning 81 in August, so we're quite due going to see her. And she lives in Mumbai, so it will be really amazing to go and give her a bit of care. She really deserves it, but we'll have to see how the situation goes. That's like my big dream, but I'm not sure if that will happen.
That sounds wonderful, and happy early birthday to your grandma. And I wanted to ask one last final question before we wrap this up. If you could send out one message to our viewers, what would it be?
I think regarding public sexual harassment, my message would just be trust in the validity of your experiences and the fact that you will process things in your own time. I really hate the idea that people would feel guilty about not being able to respond in the moment, but there are so many ways of empowering yourself and showing your resistance after something like that happens. For example, doing things like joining our campaign, talking about it, making art about it. I think people worry sometimes about that if they don't stand up for themselves in the moment, then they've failed themselves. And I don't believe that that's true. I think that everyone needs the right amount of time to get through things, and that any time that you resist, even if it's quite long afterwards, is still resistance. And that's what really counts. That's what people should focus on.
That's really beautiful. Just to let viewers know that they're not alone, and they truly have someone on their side. And I do want to thank you for having this conversation with me and Julia. It's just been so empowering and moving to learn what you do and the impact that you have with our streets now. And I do want to thank the viewers for watching this live stream, and you guys can watch it later on YouTube. And thank you again.
Thanks so much. It's been my pleasure. I love the questions, and it was really nice talking to you both.
Yeah, it was so nice meeting you.